Jawando. He is a graduate of the class of 2007 from the law school, but he also received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the university. And he's one of the very special people who did that in all of that in 6 years. He is a council member. He's been recognized by some of his constituents from the Montgomery County Council in our neighboring suburb. And he's perfect for us tonight because we are celebrating Black History Month. And also this is the first program of the Black Law Students Mentoring and Leadership Program, which is the brainchild of our dean, Dean Payne. And so, yes, he couldn't be here tonight, but this was very important to him. And so we're able to launch this, and we're doing this, of course, with our Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board and our wonderful BALSA students as well. He's perfect for this because he's written a memoir, and it's entitled My 7 Black Fathers, a young activist's memoir of race, family, and the mentors who made him whole. So without any further ado, Will, why don't you start us off?
Is this one on?
Yes.
This is on as well? Okay. Well, thank you. And I always have to call Dean Miles, because I had the great honor to be on the selection committee when we selected our first African-American dean, Dean Miles at that time. So that deserves a round of applause. And I know we have another dean, Dean Jefferson, in here, who is like a surrogate mother and auntie to all of the Black students that have come through these hallowed halls, and so many other students as well. But are you still doing the barbecue when things allow?
Well, not the last 2 years because of pandemic, but
Okay.
we are anxious.
Well, hopefully again. That's always a highlight, and hopefully some of you haven't experienced that will get to experience that. I have to recognize my wonderful wife, Michelle Jawando, who's in the front here. And we met while I was here. We met in the summer of 2004, and she was a second year law student, about to be a third year law student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I was here as a senior in the undergrad, getting ready to start my first year of law school. And we met and got married while I was here in law school. And so she's been all along for the ride, and she's familiar. She took her Shimmer Barberry class in this building, so she's like a Catholic student.
You will pass.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's great to be here. This is the first in-person talk I've done on the book, so this is going to be kind of interesting. Yeah, I've done a couple online things. It actually doesn't come out until May 3rd, but it is available for pre-order, and you can buy that on anything that sells books. So please do that. It's a very personal story. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the book and what it does and says, and then we can have a conversation. It talks about my journey. It's a memoir, and it's personal, but it's really applicable to, I think, a lot of different people's lives. And I think that's one of the things I'm excited about, is that it has a lot of through lines. It tells the story of my life through the lens of these 7 Black men who each have a chapter in the book. There's 7 chapters in the introduction, who were either my biological father, for whom I was estranged isn't even the right word. I call him in the book an absent presence. My mom and he were married early on and divorced when I was 6. And my father's from Nigeria. That's where Jawando comes from. And he immigrated here in the early 70s, just after the Biafran Civil War in that country, and came here, met my mom, who was a little 5 foot with heels white woman from Kansas. And they got together. He came to Kansas and somehow met her, and they got together and moved to DC. And I was born. And he was very detached from his father, didn't have a relationship, and that passed on to me. And so even when we were together, I describe it as, again, an absent presence. We didn't have much of a relationship. So they divorced when I'm 6. That creates the void that these men stepped into. And I talk about it in the terms of my father loss, right? I didn't have the role with my father, but then creating the need, but also the opportunity for my father gain. And these men stepped up in very unique and different ways. And you know, from my first black male teacher, Mr. Williams, who I didn't even know his name, taught me how to tie a tie, helped me with bullying in 4th grade, and math. He was my 4th grade math teacher. First black man I ever saw in a suit. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I only knew him for 9 months, but he had a dramatic impact on my life. My stepfather, who my mom met when she got a new job, he was a printer at the publishing company that she worked at. And he taught me how to use my hands and how to be dedicated to family and some really core concrete things. And each man has a different set of lessons. I meet Dean Sanwuya, who's the first Nigerian that's not my dad that I meet, who I end up traveling to Nigeria to when I'm 19. He worked at my mother's job and helped me to express and understand my culture. That was a gap for me, that side of my heritage. And then Barack Obama, who's chapter 6, for whom I started working for when I was here at Catholic. I went to the night program. I worked for him in the Senate when he was in the United States Senate. Got married and had all my kids, or 3 of the 4, while I was working for him, either in the Senate or the White House. And he was very impactful in me becoming a professional man, a public servant, a husband, a father, and was along for that journey and guided me. And I don't meet him until my mid-20s. And one of the real through lines of the book is that mentors, particularly for black men and boys, come in all shapes and sizes. I knew Mr. Williams when I was 10 for 9 months. I knew Barack Obama I still know him. I knew him for a long time, but the relationship was as an adult, right? And it was a different type of relationship, more professional to start. And I got to know him more as the relationship went along. And all the other men have a different form and shape. Jay Fletcher, who's one of the middle chapters, the first openly gay black man I ever meet, who exposes me to the theater and the arts, teaches me how to play backgammon and Risk and things that I love to do today. Tennis, things that coming from where I came from in Langley Park, part of Silver Spring, very low income, would not have had exposure to. And he was very intentional. So kind of the more traditional mentorship relationship that I think a lot of people think of when they think of a mentor. But all of these relationships were very different. And I needed every one of them, and I still need them. I'm still being mentored, I'm still being fathered, and I seek to do that for others as well. And so the final kind of part of the book, chapter 7, is my father, Olayinka Jawando, which, because of the father loss I described, because of the father gain I experienced, it created the opportunity for my father healing, coming back and reconciling with my dad later in life. And he died in 2017 of cancer. But before he did, he was able to live with us for 4 years and become a great grandfather to our 3 daughters. He didn't get to meet our son, unfortunately, but he was a great grandfather. And they had a totally different experience with him. And it allowed us to reconcile and have some really good years together. Take a very transformative trip back to Nigeria, his first in 30 years, my second after I went with Dean. And Michelle was actually on that trip. And we visited where he grew up and my grandparents' grave. And that was really the start of our healing process. And so when he passed, though it was too soon, we were in a place that was much better. And I felt good about where we were. And I tell that story as well. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll take questions. This is also a call to action. There's a sociological piece to this. I am a civil rights lawyer. I am a policymaker. So I could not just tell the story without embedding some of these systemic inequities that unfortunately create the conditions for black men and boys to not do as well as their peers. And I was a part of this study that was in the New York Times. Some of you may have read it, on race and opportunity about 3 years ago, maybe 3.5. It was done by researchers at Harvard and Stanford and the IRS and the Census Bureau. And it took the 20 million children that were born between 1978 and 1983. There were 20 million children born in the US, and I'm in that window, so you know how old I am now. And they looked at what their parents were making when in the construction of those families when these children were born, right? So all the stuff you learn from the Census Bureau. Was it a single parent home? Where did they live? How much income? They looked at the IRS data for that. Level of education of the parents. So all the things you hear about of why people do differently in life. And then they looked at them 35, 40 years later and said, well, what are these folks making now? What are those children making now? And what it showed a lot. It's a treasure trove of data that's still being dug through and still being used to be applied to policy. But one of the things it showed that is in 99% of communities, census tracts in the country, 99%, Black boys and white boys from the same background had a wide earnings gap 35 to 40 years later. So they were born in the same income bracket, in the same neighborhood, to the same two-parent household with the same level of education. They had a wide income gap. It also showed that if you were wealthy as an African-American boy, you had a 50% chance of dropping to the bottom income quartile, whereas if you were a white boy, you had a 90% chance of staying in that millionaire bracket. So it also showed that opportunity was very fragile, right? But there were these 1% communities where that gap didn't exist, where what we would all want to happen happened. That boys and Black boys and white boys from the same background, same communities, did similarly well in earnings 35 to 40 years later. And I grew up adjacent to one of these zip codes, downtown Silver Spring, 20910. And I didn't live there, but my mother worked there. And that's where I used to go every day after school. It's where I would run around her office and all those things. And one of the statistically significant features of these census tracts, these 1% census tracts, was that they have a higher percentage of Black male working class fathers. Not necessarily the fathers of the children themselves, but fathers in those communities. And so when I was thinking about framing this book and why I did it the way I did, and called it My Seven Black Fathers, but also structured it the way I did, is that I realized when I thought about these men, I met 4 of the 7 in that zip code, right? And so I literally benefited from this, what this study has shown, at least one of the factors of why you can overcome some of the negative stereotypes and poor outcomes that you see, unfortunately, in 99% of the rest of the country. And so when I got interviewed for the New York Times, they were like, well, what's going on in this zip code? What's going on in this community? And so I talked about that. But it really undergirds the premise that I'll leave you with in the book. And it's simple, but it's profound, I think, that Black men, we hold within ourselves the power to heal and transform the lives of other Black men and boys. And Ibram Kendi, who I'm sure a lot of you read, said about this book, and in doing so, laid to waste the stereotypes that plague Black men and boys today. And I think that's a profound and powerful statement that despite the systemic inequities we face, we have within ourselves the ability to overcome those by engaging with each other. That doesn't mean we shouldn't fix the systemic things. And I talk about that a lot in the book too, and I lay out pretty plainly what they are. But that despite that, there's a hopeful message that, like my life, is one of many examples where these men countered those racist stereotypes and allowed me to be standing here today as a councilman, as a lawyer, as a husband, a father. And I hope that a lot of people see that as a call to action, to say, it doesn't have to be through a formal mentorship program, it can be. It can be a smiling at a young man on the street, it can be saying an encouraging word, it can be, advocating for more Black male teachers who are only 2% of the teaching workforce. There's a lot of ways to enable those relationships, whether you're a Black person or not. You can know the power of that and enable those relationships and have those relationships if you are a Black man or boy. But I think this isn't applicable to all types of mentors, right? We all know, if you're sitting here, we all have our 7. We all have probably more than that had a dramatic impact on our lives. And I hope that also allows people to think about that. Who are those people? Who are those mentors? Who are those fathers, those mothers that had that impact on them? So that's the book, and I hope you read it. I think it's also an interesting story, and I'm happy to talk more about it. Thank you.
Well, this is really your opportunity to ask more questions of Will. I am, and of course Michelle, we both read the book. We don't have a lot of time today, and I want to make sure you all have a chance to ask Will some questions. So some of you may be ready at the bit to do that. If not, I told Will there were many things in the book that were wonderful, and you really have to read it. It had me in tears at times, and so I'll just start off with one that I sort of told Will. The one story, all of the stories are great, but Mr. Williams is a powerful story, and this is the fourth grade teacher. And I as I said to Will, you know, the other mentors, 6 mentors, were sort of put in his life in somewhat of a more natural way. His stepfather, his father, of course, and then the 2 gentlemen that worked with his mom, and his mom would have him come to the office. And then the coach at St. John's and Barack Obama, they were sort of his selections. He went to them, but Mr. Williams was the person who was what I call his surprise mentor. And it's a very important one because he's his teacher at a very important age. And we don't have many Black teachers in the schools. It's hard to make a living and to have a family. Will, with your leadership and the work that you're trying to do, what are some of the things you hope you can do to bring a greater number, even if you can? I don't know what you're doing in Montgomery County to get more men of color into the schools to teach that fourth grade student who's never had a Black man teach him. And you may want to tell them a little bit about what happened before you found Mr. Williams and how you had been pretty beaten down by the experiences at the schools that you had attended before.
I appreciate that. I'm going to stand because I don't want you guys to have to look through the lectern. Yeah, it's something that I alluded to in the talk. 2% Black male teachers, but it's not much better for Black women. There's Black teachers in general are our second grader, our daughter came home this year, the first day of school, and she has a Black woman teacher. She was like, "Mommy, Dad, I have a Black woman teacher," and she was just like blown away. I mean, and she's doing so well. She's excited to go every day, and so the power of seeing yourself. I don't have to tell this room. When I was here at Catholic, there were 232 students in the 2004 day program, and there were 2 Black men, me and my roommate, John Luke, if you remember John. And there were more women, as there always are, it's just, but not a lot. There were maybe 10 of them. And, so it's an important thing. We have some programs where we try to do loan forgiveness. We try to do recruitment, but you really have to create a pathway. And I don't have to tell this room, like, debt is a big thing that gets in the way for people. We don't pay teachers enough. And so when you have people that are trying to get their family out of poverty or move to the next level, they don't necessarily look to teaching. So there's a whole bunch of things that systemically get in the way of it that we have to address. And, as you mentioned, Mr. Williams, he's one of the most powerful, I think, chapters. I love all the chapters, but I really love the chapter on Mr. Williams. And, as I mentioned, and we call him, if you notice when you read the book, everyone else has their full name. All the chapters are named after the men. Mr. Williams is Mr. Williams because I didn't know his name. You don't know your 4th grade math teacher's first name. And I've learned a lot about him in the research and writing of this book. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019. And I didn't get to tell him, but I have connected with his children and his grandchildren, and they know about it. But he was a Vietnam veteran who was a captain in the Army, and he flew helicopters in Vietnam, and then came back, retired, and then joined Montgomery County Public Schools as an elementary math teacher. So he was a unicorn of unicorns as far as like being a rarity. And he came to me at a time when I was really teetering on the edge. I had gone to predominantly, like Dean Miles, you know, my mom was big Catholic and wanted to send me to Catholic schools. And I had gone to Our Lady of Lourdes in Bethesda, which was an all-white at the time, you know, Catholic school. And I was definitely the only black boy. I think I might have been the only black person in my class. And I just couldn't do anything right. I was treated, and I talk about this in the book, every time I wanted to answer a question, I was acting out. Every time someone did something, tried to like rub my skin or touch my hair, and I pushed the kid, I got in trouble. You know, it was just every classic story you could think of someone being at a place where they weren't understood or accepted. And I had internalized that. And I thought something was wrong with me, you know, and that's what happens to kids. And by the time I got to Mr. Williams, and so my mother was just like, all right, we're just gonna try public school, because, you know, I had just been so beat down in second and third grade. And so I come to him at a point where I am very fragile. And if you look at children, the point where they're gonna turn, where they're gonna lose hope, and kind of give up, and I would, you know, that's right around that age. And he came in looking with his suit and tie and looking all dapper. I wish I had a picture of him I would show you. He looked like, I describe him in the book. He looked like a young Morgan Freeman. And so you guys will know what that is. And that kind of brown, very distinguished, and a little short bush. And I just could not believe that he was the teacher. And so he helped me with being bullied. He helped me with my self-esteem. And again, I only knew him 9 months. And I may have had, it's also a testament to the example that can be set, because, you know, I tell some stories about our personal interactions, but I probably only had, you know, a handful of intimate interactions with him, that some of which I chronicle in the book, but just the power of his example and how he carried himself and comported himself has stuck with me, you know, 30 years later. Oh, and Michelle's telling me, we tagged a line from the book. I think I'll read just a couple sentences about this one, and then we move to the next question. So, in so many ways, as a father and in my work as an activist and public servant, Mr. Williams remains a presence in my life today. His dignity, his commitment to high standards, and to carrying out those standards humanely, with great attention and care, are signposts that I employ regularly to guide my path. Yet, I never saw him outside of school, never laid eyes on him after the end of 4th grade, or even learned his first name, which demonstrates something important about mentorship. Mentors don't have to be involved in every aspect of someone's life to make a difference, nor do mentors have to be a constant presence to have a deep impact. In just 9 months, Mr. Williams changed my life with his. So that's just a paragraph, but yeah, he was an important figure, and I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
That was important. My husband is a teacher too, and he said, but you can't make a living teaching. It's so hard. And he taught elementary school, so I kind of asked that with Jacob in mind as well. Are there any questions from any of you in the audience that you'd like to ask Will? I know you haven't had the benefit of reading the book, but we're talking about mentorship and leadership, and Will is that as well as a community leader. So feel free. If you don't, I'll dominate.
So you mentioned the mentors that you actually went to and sought mentorship from. How do you actually find a mentor and keep or her?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad you framed it that way. I'm going to talk about that more as I give future talks about the mentors I sought out versus the ones that were just there, right? And so I'll start generally. I always try to have 3 types of people in my life. I try to have people that I am mentoring, right? People that I am pouring into, for whom I have more experience and have been where they want to go, or can give them insight. I try to keep people who are peer mentors, right? My colleagues, people who can hold me accountable to the goals that I've set for myself, and to get me back in line, right? When I'm not doing that. And then I have people that are mentoring me, that are, could be older, or more experienced. And I think I always try to do kind of a check of, or do I have all 3 of these types of people in my life? Because you should have them all at the same time. You don't have to have 100 of them, but you should have someone in each category. And when I was at the point to seek out Barack Obama, for example, who's one I sought out hard, it's one of the great self-determination stories in my life. I'm not from Chicago. I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland. I have no connection to Illinois. And when he got elected, probably like many of you, if you haven't seen the 2004 DNC speech that he gave in Boston, which kind of put him on the national stage. Who's seen that? Has anyone seen that? Okay, most people. You guys got to watch it. Go watch it. It was one of the best speeches I had ever heard, but let alone by a politician. And I just remember being mesmerized. I wasn't in Boston. I was watching in TV. But he had a line in that speech, and he said, we need to eradicate the slander that a black youth with the book is acting white. And I had never heard anyone say that, let alone where he was. And I had experienced that, right? And so a lot of people, that's a common thing, or a person of color, or woman that's trying to, white has been seen as the standard, right? So if you try to do something like that, you're acting white, right? And we've all experienced that. But the fact that he gave voice to it, I was like, this guy is different. And so when he got elected to the Senate, I just would go across to his office once a week. I was working for Nancy Pelosi at the time. I was going to school at night here. I was an intern in Pelosi's office. I wasn't hired yet. And I would go across to the Senate, and I would go and say, hi, I'm Will Jawando. Here's my resume. Is that Professor Malveaux? Who is that? No, okay, that's not you. Okay. You kind of look like her from the eyes. And I would say, I'd love to work here. And they were like, okay, yeah, all right, thanks. Thanks for coming. But I did it every week for 6 months. And so by the time the 6th month, I was friends with the people. They were like, hey, Will, how you doing? How's your mom? And I just happened to be in the office when the chief of staff came out and was like, who is this guy that keeps coming by? And they were like, oh, it's Will. He works for Pelosi. He wants to work here. And so that I told him my story, and he took me in the back, and he was, it went from there. About maybe 2 months after that, I got hired. But I tell that story because I was determined that he had something that I needed to learn, right? If I wanted to impact my community, learn how to be where he was going, I had to work hard at it. And so it's a long way of saying, have all those people in your life, seek out people who can help you, and don't give up on it. I think a lot of times people send an email or two and they're like, oh, well, they didn't respond, or whatever. You gotta, if you really want it, you're gonna keep at it. And even if it's not that person, something will materialize. So the chief of staff is one of my best friends and mentors to this day, right? And I wouldn't have gotten the job if I didn't get close to him, and even eventually meet Obama. Because when I get hired, I'm like a junior nothing. Obama, he doesn't even know who I am. I don't really form a relationship to him maybe years later, right? And so it's an example of just pursuing it. And then the last thing I'd say on that is, the point I made with Mr. Williams, you expand your definition of what mentorship is. I think a lot of times we try to put it in a box. And even if someone gives you something one time that you needed, that helped. And that's good. And that's additive. And just get it from more people and give it to more people, right? Like I said, you don't know if if you stop a little girl or a little boy in the street and you say, you are absolutely beautiful. I think you can do anything in this world. I do this a lot as a politician. I go to the communities I grew up in and I tell them, you can be exactly like me if you want to be. You can do even more than me. I sat where you sat, right? Those things stick with people and motivate people. So I think expand, but I think we know that anecdotally, but for some reason, we don't think it works for us. It works for us too. You can get small things from people and gather them constantly, and they can help you be mentored. So I think expand the definition, work hard at it, and then have all those types of people in your life. I think I saw you had one. Yeah. Did you have one?
Yeah, I have a question. So to your point, you know, when you get a little age on you, you notice that, and I think you're illustrating this, is that when you're younger, you feel like you have to ask somebody to be a mentor.
Right.
And then when you get a little age on you, somebody tells you, "Oh, you're my mentor," and you know, you never have this formal relationship. Is that what you're describing? I mean, so for people who are younger, just think about that. Think about people in your life that are like how you described, right? Like you didn't ask these people, "Will you be your mentor, my mentor?" Did you?
No, none of them.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
I mean, Obama was the closest, maybe, in that I sought him out, but you know, that was, you know, yeah. So no, I think most of them, they either decided to give something to
It was
me.
natural.
Yeah, it was a natural occurrence, and I think you're right. I mean, you know, I'm hoping one thing that comes from the book is like, if there's a hashtag, it's like my7. Like, think about who those people are, and then do that for others in an intentional way, in whatever type or form or time you can give. You know, Dean Miles is a mentor. Dean Jefferson is a mentor. You know, I've had many that are here, men and women, you know, at the law school. But I think the thing that I think is underreported, not I think, I know it's underreported in the story it isn't told, is how powerful a black man and boy can be in the life of a black man or boy. It's just, it's almost like a curative. You know, if you think about the legacy of slavery and discrimination in this country, it's pretty amazing that we still have that power within. But mentorship has that power for everybody in some form or fashion. So absolutely, I think, you know, you're right. You get people come up to you and like, you don't even remember what you said. Someone will say, you said something to me in 2002. Like, you know, so yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you have all experienced that as well.
And then my other question was,
Yeah, go ahead.
just quickly, like, it's just, I'm fascinated, like, if you hadn't hung out in zip code 20910, how do you think the trajectory of your life? I mean, even though, like, you probably went like a half a mile away from your house, but do you think the trajectory of your life would have gone completely different?
Well, you know, one of the stories I tell in the introduction is of my really good friend Calfani, who unfortunately was shot and killed when we were in teenagers. And we meet in 5th grade on the basketball court, which was for me a big entry point into my own blackness, right? Being the son of a white woman who divorced a Nigerian father. So I don't really have an African American foothold. And basketball is that for me. It's particularly in like, you know, the late 80s, early 90s, you know, in the heyday. And Calfani is like so good. He's so good at basketball. He's like everything I want to be. And we're best friends, and we kind of separate in high school when I get a scholarship to St. John's and he goes to the local school. And unfortunately, you know, we talk less and less and he passes away. I know he didn't have these men, or at least not in the way I did. And so could it have been different? Absolutely. But one of the things that gives me hope is that even though the 99% of the zip codes don't have a large proportion of these men are there, right? And the possibility, and those relationships are happening in those communities for sure, and they are saving lives. But we just need to have more of them, and it needs to be more intentional. But absolutely, I mean, even with all these mentors, my 7 Black fathers and some, right? I'm only telling 7, but there's many more. I still been arrested. You know, I've still, 1 in 2 Black men by the time they're 23 are arrested. Right? 1 in 3 will spend time in jail or prison. That doesn't matter who you are. So it's still tough despite it. And so absolutely it could have turned out differently, but I do think that there is a unique power within us to make those outcomes less likely, even if you're in another zip code, not 20910.